because it was a setup.
Back in the NME offices on the Monday morning, we talked of nothing else. It was a real big deal. Now, I had a particular vested interest in this for another reason. I'd interviewed Kylie Minogue, the delightful Kylie Minogue, the week before, for what was going to be next week's cover. And all journalists like to write the cover story. You like to frame them and put you on your wall. You like doing covers. And I walked into this maelstrom on the Monday morning of people saying, we have to drop the Kylie Minogue cover, we have to go with this Morrissey story, as Morrissey lost his marbles, effectively. So for two reasons. One, I wanted my Kylie Minogue cover to stay in place. And two, I was a big Morrissey supporter, and I knew that there were a lot of people at the NME at the time who were gunning for Morrissey. Not literally, and it all sounds rather petty and small-minded, but that's what the rock world was like then. There were a few people there who didn't like Morrissey. There were a few people there who didn't like the fact that he wasn't politically correct. He wasn't like Bono. He wasn't making vacuous, empty political slogans most of the time. He was a white, working-class Northern Englander who was refusing to play the metropolitan game.
The knives were out, and the success of Your Arsenal was quickly eclipsed by the anger of journalists who felt that Morrissey had become too politically irresponsible to merit his position in popular culture. Yet some felt the attack was too convenient for a music press anxious to topple the singer from his throne.
It was a definite setup. It was a few journalists, including one who was a friend of mine, and I got the interviews at the time, so I got it on tape to cover myself, you know. It was just a not Morrissey thing, and they'd already printed the cover. You know, they'd already got the headline. What was it? I forgot what the headline was it on now. Flying the flag or flirting with disaster, wasn't it? Yeah. Is that Running Man I'm talking? Yeah. It was very definitely an inside job to discredit him.
Yes, I know that David Brett, who wrote a rather odd biography of Morrissey, says that it was a stitch-up. Well, it was in the sense that people had been waiting for him to fall and get him in their sights. It wasn't contrived. We hadn't been waiting to run that issue, and we really, really argued about it, really violently argued about it, shouting, like I said, it really almost came to blows. But there were a lobby of people at the NME, and in rock culture in general, who thought Morrissey had become a bit of a bore and wanted to give him a bit of a kicking, and he gave them the perfect excuse.
I mean, I think when Morrissey wrapped himself in the Union Jack, you see, he did it at a time when the Union Jack suggested things that, oddly enough, now it doesn't so much. I mean, there was once upon a time when if you had a cross of St George, you were a racist. And if you had a Union Jack, there was something suspicious about you. So when he draped himself in a Union Jack, I think people thought that that was him draping himself in a National Front flag. He was, in fact, draping himself in the Union Jack. And now that it's been reappropriated much more as a cheerful, celebratory thing, it wouldn't look as odd.
Well, the whole Madstock incident, which has been captured, and you can still see the image of Morrissey in his gold lame shirt waving the Union Jack, to a crowd which, for better or worse, had an element of the skinhead in them because it was a Madness concert, and much against their wishes, they always had that following, that slight following of the far right, the skinheads, the Nazis, if you will. So to wave a flag was perhaps foolish. I think what Morrissey was trying to do, and I think he still refuses to talk about it, was it's this recurring theme of Englishness, which was all the way through the Smiths records and still persists to this day in Morrissey's solo work. So I think it was just a slightly misjudged thing, and he was nearly stamping that, if anything. I don't think he was. Although it's hard to tell with Morrissey, isn't it? Because maybe he did know all along that that's the crowd he would be playing to. He's a tricky swine. You never know with him.
It was an idiotic thing to do, I think. I think it was an idiotic thing to do in that circumstance. I don't know what he thought he was doing, and I don't think he does now. I think he was winding people up. And boy, did he manage it.
I don't believe Morrissey did it because it was identified with extremist parties. I think he did it because it chimed with his understanding that he was demonstrating he was still English. So, you know, I think he became an easy target at a time for people who weren't really thinking it through.
Morrissey responded to the criticism with silence, and although the reaction would eventually die down, it left an indelible stain on his professional career.
I think that he kind of just refuses to defend himself, which can be quite confusing. It's almost as though, why do I have to justify myself to anyone? It doesn't have to justify him, but then if you don't, then the consequences can be that you're judged perhaps unfairly.
Ignoring the early hostility, Morrissey toured Your Arsenal throughout 1992. The following year, Beethoven Was Deaf was released, a live album recorded in Paris and London at the end of the tour. In June 1993, Morrissey began working on his new album. He enlisted Johnny Bridgewood, who had previously worked on the single Pregnant for the Last Time, to play double bass on what would be a more organic work.
Well, obviously the band had evolved with Boz and Alan, and then changes were taking place, and basically Morrissey was looking for a new rhythm section. You know, I came to mind because I'd obviously worked with him before. I knew Boz and Alan, and so I was invited down to Nomis Studios to play some of the songs that would turn up on Vauxhall and I, along with Woody Taylor on drums. We just spent a day playing. Morrissey came in, listened. We all gelled together really well. And a month later, we started the album.
Morrissey and his band retreated once more to Hook End Manor, this time with producer Steve Lillywhite, to work on what would become Vauxhall and I.
I think collectively it was a really good team, as is shown in the album. When we arrived there, Steve couldn't actually get there for the first 5 days, I think. So we just set up and started playing, working with the engineers. And yeah, it was a really good vibe. And then Steve arrived and it was just right, you know, let's do it kind of thing. Everybody was full of enthusiasm.
On its release in 1994, Vauxhall and I managed to silence many of Morrissey's critics. It was roundly considered to be his most relevant album of the decade.
As the album was evolving, I certainly felt, and I think everybody else felt that as well, including Morrissey, that we were making something that was really good, that kind of stood out on its own, regardless of what happened previously. It just seems to occupy its own kind of space, you know.
The production on it works well, and there's just also good material on there, good, solid material. When you compare it, say, to the Kill Uncle songs, The More You Ignore Me, The Closer I Get, Interlude, Speedway, which is a cracking record, where you really do hear him stretching out in a kind of... It wouldn't be unthinkable to hear Speedway on a Led Zeppelin record. It's long, it's rocking, it's got a certain amount of menace to it. I think that's a great record. And now, that record, Vauxhall and I, is seen, with hindsight, as perhaps the best thing he did in the middle of his career. I mean, from Viva Hate at the start, to people are saying now, You Are the Quarry is the best thing he's done in years. In the middle, his mid-period of his solo career, which you've got to remember is now a lot longer than the Smiths were ever together. Amazing, though, that sounds. Morrissey, the solo artist, I think, has been 3 times as long-lived as the Smiths as a band. So this is probably his mid-period, if not masterpiece, kind of landmark work.
To me, personally, I preferred Your Arsenal. I felt that had more vibe to it. I think Mick Ronson did a better job. But I'm not going to sit here and pick holes in Steve Lillywhite's production.